Hey everybody, it's Sean Price here with Price and Price Group. It is time for this week's episode of Real Talk. What has been happening in the Northern Virginia real estate market in the last 7 days? Let's dive into it. Okay, so it has been a very interesting last few weeks in the market. It's been a little bit surprising. It's been a little bit calmer, which is really, really good news for buyers. Sellers are still having a really good year as well. So it's just a good, healthy, stable market. So let's just dive into the numbers. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So as always, you can see here our under contract, our black line is going to be our buyer activity. And over the last 3 weeks, we saw 2 weeks of increase and then a little bit of a decline this past week. And then we saw inventory do the same thing. It declined as well. And you can't really see it here, but actually the inventory declined to here last week and then down to here this week. So you can see the inventory and demand, so supply and demand, have been pretty much even for the last 2 weeks. And so when we take that over here to the seller's market versus the buyer's market, this gray line right here is a nice neutral market. Anything above that's a seller's market, anything below that's a buyer's market. You can see we have been spending the majority of our time in an actual seller's market. The last several weeks we had gone down a little bit into a buyer's market, and now we've settled back up into a pretty neutral market. So the trend this year seems to be that we're staying with this fairly neutral market versus last year it was kind of up and down, and we were just trending a little bit stronger on the seller side. So what does this mean as far as contracts are concerned? What are we seeing? Well, the first thing is July 21st to July 27th, we saw 196 contracts come into Cardinal Title. That's down. We've been over 200, 220, 250, 290. So that number is down. So the overall market activity has slowed, which means we've hit our summer lull, which is a normal process for July, August of this market. You can see in Northern Virginia that contract price, 30% of the properties, of these 196 properties, 30% of them went under contract above asking price. 34% went under contract at asking price. So 64% went at or above asking price. Days on market for Northern Virginia, 42% went under contract in the first 7 days. So properties that are priced right and positioned appropriately, meaning their condition, they're staged appropriately and everything, those properties are still moving quickly. We're seeing 42%, that's almost half of the properties went under contract in 7 days. 23% went between 8 and 21 days. The interesting thing here that can be interpreted from both the buyer and the seller perspective is 64% of the properties went under contract at or above asking price, and 65% of the properties went under contract at 21 days or less. So that gives us a very, very clear breakpoint for buyers to understand that if a property's been on the market for about 21, 22 days, that's where you start seeing the prices going below the asking price. But up to that 21, 22 day mark, sellers are not freaking out as long as their agent's educating them on what's going on. They're understanding that they're going to stay on the market a little bit longer, and they're not willing to take those price reductions. So that 21 to 22 day mark is where a buyer, if you're looking to get something under asking price, that's the number you have to look at. But you're only going to have about 30% of the properties left at that point. So those are some interesting facts there. As far as contingencies are concerned, finance contingency was almost 50-50. 56 or 54% did get the finance contingency, but 46% did not. So that's a decrease in the number of buyers that are getting their finance contingencies. And you can see that the appraisal contingency, that stayed pretty steady from last week. It's about 60-40. Inspection contingency, again, stayed pretty steady. The majority of people are getting inspection contingencies in their contracts, even here in Northern Virginia, which is a great thing for buyers because it protects you. It lets you know what you're getting for the property. So that's one of the reasons why this is such a fair market for buyers, is because the contingencies are still in place in the contract for the majority of buyers. Even though the properties are going at or above asking price, the buyers still have their protections, which is really important. Finance versus cash, 26% were cash. That's a huge difference from the past weeks. It's usually around 10, 12, 14%. 26% were cash this time. Seller subsidies, 32% seller subsidies. Again, that's up. Seller subsidy, again, is when a seller is giving money back to the buyer for closing costs or for repairs or something along those lines, some kind of a negotiated seller subsidy. And then 96% of the contracts, the seller was contributing to buyer agent compensation. 86% of that was 2.5% or above. So again, as I say each week, sellers, it's really important that you know this, especially when in a more even market when buyers have choices. If you are not willing to help compensate the buyer's agent, which you do not have to do, it is fully negotiable. But if that buyer cannot afford to cover that buyer agent commission, they may go to another property, one of the 96% that are contributing to that buyer agent compensation. So just keep that in mind as you're going through and navigating contracts. Okay, so again, overall, buyers, it's a pretty fair market. You can get a property for a good price. There's not as much competition out there, and you can get your protections in the contracts. Sellers, you're still getting top market value. 60-something% of the properties are going at or above asking price. So it just has to be staged right, it has to be priced right, and it has to be appropriate for its condition. All right, if you guys have any questions at all, whether on the buy side or the sell side, please feel free to reach out to us. The number is 703-783-2143, and we will see you guys next week.